Welcome to Flames of Knowledge, a CFSI podcast where we analyze federal policy, spotlight leadership, and tackle issues that matter to the fire and emergency services. Stay informed, stay engaged, and let's get to work. Welcome to Flames of Knowledge, a CFSI podcast.
Hello, my name is Bill Webb, and I'm the Executive Director of the Congressional Fire Services Institute. Just a little background information on CFSI if you're unaware of our mission, but we were established in 1989. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan policy institute. Our job is pretty much twofold, and one is to sit down with the other National Fire Service organizations, find out what issues that we can address together. And once we're able to come up with that unified voice, we take our message to Capitol Hill so that the fire service can speak to members of Congress from the Republican and the Democratic side, as well as folks with the administration. We have invited a dear friend of mine and a dear friend of CFSI for so many years, and that is Dr. Denis Onieal. We just kind of thought it would be great to get Dr. Onieal talking today about the importance of the National Fire Academy. We're all aware of what's happening up in Emmitsburg with the doors being closed, and hopefully the administration will realize the important role that NFA conducts in terms of training our nation's fire service leaders and reopen the doors so that we can continue to fulfill that mission that the federal government is responsible for. And that is, again, addressing some of these challenging needs facing our firefighters throughout the country. So having said that, I did put together a little bio, although most of you in the fire service are aware of Dr. Onieal and the contributions he has made throughout the years. But I always like to start out saying that Dr. Onieal served his country. He served his country in the military, as did his son, during the Vietnam conflict. And after that, he began his work in the fire service. He started with the Jersey City Fire Service as a firefighter and rose all the way to the ranks of acting chief. In 1995, he was appointed superintendent of the National Fire Academy, again, which will be the focus of today's discussion. He served as fire superintendent until 2015, when he was appointed deputy administrator of the United States Fire Administration, which is the lead federal agency for our nation's fire service. Thereafter, he formed Onieal and Associates and delivers presentations and provides consultation on fire service leadership to fire service leaders across the country. But it's so good to have you join us, Denis. And again, I appreciate everything you've done for CFSI throughout the years and everything you have done for the fire service. So welcome.
Well, Bill, thanks a lot. And I want to tell you how much I'm impressed that you could read my mother's handwriting. That was a good job. I'm very concerned about some of the things that we see going on at the federal level right now, particularly with respect to the issues that are important to the fire and emergency services, AFG, Safer Grants, the National Fire Academy, some of the research. And speaking as this date, April 3rd, we learned that the NIOSH cancer studies have been shut down. And these are all nicks, little hits, some of them devastating hits to the fire and emergency services in our country. And it's a local government function, and they're not asking, and they don't ask for a lot. They're just looking for that little bit of help that the federal government is able to provide. And it seems right now to be under threat.
You know, people think of the National Fire Academy, those people who have never attended the fire academy, they probably think that when they pull into Emmitsburg, they're going to see the driveway or lined with fire trucks. And they're probably thinking that everyone attending there is going to be putting turnout gear on and running through the burn buildings and such. You know, what is the reality? What actually goes on up at the National Fire Academy?
The reality is you'll never see a fire truck or a fire hose at the National Fire Academy. The National Fire Academy is actually the equivalent of our military war colleges. It's where mid to senior level officers in local fire departments come to get high-level technical, high-level managerial, high-level leadership skills. And areas of fire investigation, emergency medical services, community risk reduction, handling major disasters. And the National Fire Academy, like the Army War Colleges, provides a training that is unavailable at the state or local level. And we work very hard when I was there to make sure that there was a very strong relationship between local training, state training, and federal training, that there was no duplication of effort. So if local governments were doing it or state governments were doing it, great. We were hands off. If the states would come to us or the locals would come to us, as they often did, said, look, we really need a course in advanced disaster management or whatever it was. We would work together to get that for them.
Okay. So how do you develop the curriculum? I mean, is it, Dr. Onieal working with the Board of Visitors, or do you bring in some experts in the field? How do you, again, develop that curriculum?
It's a pretty rigid process, and it begins with a needs analysis. And that needs analysis is usually takes the form of some sort of a survey or a series of conversations with the leaders in the fire service groups and the state and local training systems organization. It's called TRADE, but it's an organization that we work with closely to make sure that what we're developing is what they need. Once we've identified the course and we kind of spend a lot of time zeroing in and making sure we got it right, we bring in a cadre of subject matter experts from either inside the fire service or sometimes outside the fire service. We convene it usually in Emmitsburg, and they develop the course. And once the course is developed, we bring in what we call pilot groups, typical students that would attend this class. And we deliver the class, and they're going to find mistakes, or A needs to go before B as opposed to something else. You got to tune it up a little bit. And once the course is completed, then we send it for an outside evaluation by the American Council on Education, which awards college credit recommendation based on the bachelor's or master's degree level. And that is an assurance both to the National Fire Academy and the state and local training systems that it's academically sound, that it's passed a rigid examination by an outside objective body, and they're going to get added value to the course because now they have college credit that they can transfer into their local degree programs.
So the curriculum itself is not static. I assume that you're looking at emerging threats, emerging trends, et cetera, and you're always creating new programs to address tomorrow's challenges, correct?
It's constant, and we're looking at usually between 3 and 5 years, a course has got to be updated or eliminated, and we've got to bring something new in.
Okay. How many students do you recall attend? I don't know if the numbers have gone up or down since you've been there, but approximately how many students attend the academy?
When I was this deputy administrator and superintendent, we had about 115,000 students a year trained through the National Fire Academy. That is in residence on campus in Emmitsburg, through the state and local training systems and online. I was talking to the superintendent a couple of weeks ago, and they're at about 60,000. And the reason is that when COVID hit in 2020, the school shut down, everything shut down. And so now it's kind of building back up. But, 60,000 people a year is quite a number when you consider, a local college might only have 10,000 students or 8,000 students. They're training 60,000 people.
So do you hand off the program to the state training directors, or do you provide the instructors as well?
Yeah, there's two ways we do it. One way is we will send the National Fire Academy instructor out, typically when the course is new, when the course is particularly difficult, or the state and local training systems want the college credit recommendation associated with it. Other times, we give the course to the states to deliver with their own instructors, and then they send us the information, the student data back. And the reason that it's important for us to have the student data is that frequently people will move around from fire department to fire department, and they have a central registry of the courses that they've taken at the National Fire Academy, which are good all over the country. Every state accepts National Fire Academy courses because every state delivers National Fire Academy courses. So there's a reciprocity there amongst the institutions.
Well, having served in the military, this kind of question just kind of popped in my mind. Is there any type of training or any type of certification, so to speak, in the military that can be transferred over into the fire service? Or do they kind of have to start when you go from the military? Because a lot of folks like you made that transition. I mean, do they have to basically start from scratch, or is there any,
Where
Credit.
where I'm aware of, there's an attempt to translate military experience to civilian experience has to do with the emergency medical services.
Okay.
Now, if you're a medic in the Army or the Navy, Navy provides medics to both the Navy and the Marine Corps. And when I was in the service, I was attached to the Marine Corps, and we had a Navy doc. Those folks have extraordinary skills. And I don't want to diminish in any way the work that the men and women in EMS do in the fire service. But those Army and Navy medics saved a lot of my friends. And so they're always held in high regard. So it depends upon the state which licenses paramedics and EMTs to what they'll accept from the military. But I think that's a noble effort.
Correct me if I'm wrong. EMS started in the military.
Well, EMS started in the military, and if you want to go back in history, the reason that the fire department wound up delivering, and it does deliver about 80 to 90% of the emergency medical services in the United States, it was the returning Vietnam veterans who said, you know, we know how to do this, we can do this, and they were joining the fire department.
Mhm.
And that was the beginning of it. And the other event that occurred, and sadly enough, during war, medicine makes a lot of advances. The reason it does is because they have young men and women who are seriously injured, and they can take medical risks to save them. So you look at, you know, bypass surgery, you know, a lot of the medical advancements in our country are a result of the military medical system and the medics that save those lives.
It is amazing. You know, getting back to the fire academy, the cost breakdown, you know, does the student pay full freight? National Fire Academy pitch in, the fire department? How does that all work?
Bill, it's a split. And depending upon the organization locally, the local organization is responsible for transportation, local transportation, driving to the airport, whatever that is. They're also responsible for the salary of the student while they're attending the class. They're also responsible to pay overtime to replace that firefighter or fire officer while they're at the National Fire Academy. And they're also, the local government is also responsible for meals. The National Fire Academy pays for the round trip transportation to the academy. They pay for the dorm rooms and the training. So again, every department is different in terms of salaries, volunteers, and things like that. But it's probably pretty close to a 50-50 or a 60-40 split, thereabouts.
I mean, so under the current structure, it is a financial burden for any fire department to be sending a student to the fire academy, which makes it all more reason why the federal government should be covering some of these charges.
Well, Bill, a good friend of ours, the late Alan Brunacini, said that if you think training is expensive, wait till you find out how much stupidity costs. And, you know, I can pick up the newspaper once a month and read about an event where there was a major screw up by a fire department, either because of something they did or didn't do. And these are men and women who are dedicated, who work hard, but they just didn't have the knowledge to handle a situation. And that's the kind of a thing that the National Fire Academy does. So remember one thing, every disaster, whatever it is, starts with somebody dialing 911. And the fire department shows up to solve the problem. And if it gets out of control, the state will come in. And if it gets out of control that the state can't handle it, the feds come in and FEMA. But if an event is handled locally, and if it's handled well by trained people, the federal government does not have the bill to pay, you know, 10 times what it would have cost if it had been handled right.
So the federal government, in terms of the cost of operating the National Fire Academy. I mean, the return on investment, tenfold, 20-fold, 30-fold for the nation.
I've been on a lot of federal disasters, and it's a lot more money than that.
It's interesting. I know one of the classes was incident command, and how it's applied at the local level, bringing local, state, federal agencies together and resources. And at our National Fire and Emergency Services dinner, we had Chief John Donnelly speak as our keynote speaker, and he spoke about that tragic aviation disaster over the Potomac that killed 65 passengers on the plane and 3 in the helicopter. But he did talk about incident command. In fact, he said, things were kind of running along smoothly. All of a sudden, the feds come along and say, okay, we'll take it from here. And he said, okay, if you want to send your guys down into the bottom of the river and bring out the bodies, go have at it. But that's when the feds say, okay, it's you. But he did say, they did set up the incident command system. And he said that they had over 70 agencies, local, state, federal, and over 2,300 personnel involved in that disaster. So I know that, again, incident command is a subject that's ingrained in folks who attend the National Fire Academy. So if you can kind of hit on that. And,
Sure.
and you can talk about Los Angeles, the fires there. You can talk about World Trade Center, Oklahoma. Yeah, it's incident command and local fire chiefs for the most part.
Bill, I think what I'd like to do is begin with my military experience, and I was a radio operator in the infantry. I just carried a radio on my back, and I could call the next squad over. I could call the next company over. I could call over the next division. I could call in airstrikes and naval bombardments because it was one system of military presence in that area, and it was because they worked together. So the incident command system isn't something that was invented by the fire service. This is something that's been working for years in the military. When I was in Jersey City is surrounded by 13 other municipal fire departments, all one another. You couldn't tell them apart. And we called on each other frequently for mutual aid. And we worked that incident command system. It was seamless. Everybody understood how the system worked and how well it worked. I've been on disasters, a lot of disasters. On September 12th, 2001, they sent me to New York City. I was involved in Katrina, Hurricane Sandy, Harvey, Maria, it seems to me, quite a few disasters. And I could almost get on the ground and in 15 or 20 minutes, figure out whether this thing's going to be a success or not, based on how the local government operated. Now, that incident command system recognizes that there's a unity of command. There's one boss. That boss makes a decision. This is where they get their support. When it's a large incident like the plane crash in Washington, D.C., you have a bunch of agencies working together in an emergency operations center. There's one message. As tragic as that plane crash was, it was equally remarkable in the way it was handled. And I see that all the time. So, I don't want to talk about any current events because there's going to be plenty of room for awards and criticism. We'll just leave it at that. But I take it from me. I spent 25 years in local government emergency services and 25 years in federal emergency services. You can tell there's a difference when people work together, speak the same language, and have the same goals and objectives.
And again, I go back to the Fire Academy because I know you offer a lot of classes in incident command.
Let me give you a small example. During the World Trade Center, those first day or two, the collapse of those 2 buildings was not a federal disaster. The only thing that made it federal was that it was a plane crash and the Department of Transportation had authority over that. But after, the wheels started turning, the FBI came in. Of course, the New York City Police Department was there. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms was there. The Fire and Emergency Services were there. And somebody has to sit down and ask the question, when you're digging the pile and trying to find people, What about the evidence that the police, law enforcement folks need? What happens to critical pieces of evidence when you need to remove a body or do these kinds of things? That's critical stuff. I mean, the FBI, rightfully so, is interested in saving and preserving evidence. But to be candid, the firefighters don't care. They're trying to save people's lives. So when those kinds of events occur, the incident command system is what resolves those major, major problems. We do a couple of different things with the incident command system, but primarily what we have graphics, big, graphics, television screens, and we put these major incidents up, and the students have the responsibility of performing all of the functions of the incident command system, from incident commander all the way down to public information officer and liaison with different agencies and operations and logistics and experiences that they will never get at home. You pick a town of, I'm going to make some, Peoria, Illinois. Where is Peoria, Illinois Fire Department and Police Department going to get the experience of dealing with 400 or 500 responders that show up in 2 hours? What experience do they have managing something that large? They're going to be facing things that they've never faced before, but understanding the incident command system, they will be able to get the help.
There's an old saying in the fire service, 200 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. And yet we're seeing, we're witnessing significant changes in the areas of research, technology, training, as well as the culture. So as a consequence, the fire service is becoming a safer profession. I think it's safe to assume, wouldn't you say, that progress is due in part to federal programs such as AFG, such as SAFER, the National Fire Academy, the Firefighter Cancer Registry, DOT's hazmat training programs, ATF's arson investigation programs. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. The one thing I always say, in presentations is you can almost look within every federal agency, and there is some type of program in there that impacts the fire service in a positive way: training, funding, grants, etc. So, your thoughts on that?
Bill, I'm going to take it, if you don't mind, I'm going to take it one step further.
By all means.
It impacts the fire service, yes, but the benefit is the citizen. The benefit is the parent whose daughter is injured in a car accident. The benefit is in a child who has dialed 911 because their mom had a heart attack, or these are the kinds of things that are important. These are the services that the fire and emergency services provide. So in order for them to receive that service, in order for when grandma falls out of bed for the fire department to show up and help her, there has to be an organization that's trained. And that organization has to be managed well, has to be budgeted well, has to be trained well. And they do that to an extent, but they just need a little help. They can't do it all. They can't do it all the time. So if you take, for example, the National Fire Academy, I can't even do the fraction of the federal budget that is consumed by the National Fire Academy. I'd say 1/100,000th of a cent or something thereabouts. When we're faced with new technologies like lithium-ion batteries in vehicles, we've never faced anything like that before. We need research. We are dealing with changes in methods and materials of construction that we're not even aware of, that are going on in the industry. And the local fire department, the Peoria, Illinois, I'll use that example again, they have 100 or 200 firefighters. Where are they going to get better?
Yeah.
If you take, let's move it out of the fire service, okay? Let's take a local community hospital. If you're ill, the local community hospital can help you out. But can the local community hospital research COVID and develop a vaccine? No, it can't.
Yeah.
So where does it go? It has to go outside the organization to get a little help. And that's the role of the federal government, not to do it for the local government, but to just provide a little help. So AFG, safer, it's a little bit of help.
Yeah.
The training is a little bit of help. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, HHS, all of those things are just a little bit of help.
That
And
goes a long way.
it goes, not only does it go a long way, but it prevents that local system from collapsing when it can't do it anymore. All right, it just keeps it humming along well.
You know, one of the things that always frustrates me is, you know, somebody can develop a product, they don't really appreciate the safety risk involved. So they, you know, the mindset is, okay, we'll just kind of pass that on to the first responders. Let that be their problem. We'll put the product out and let somebody else deal with it. And I think that's a problem that we face. You know, we talked about lithium batteries, you know, and you know, we talk about the built environment. You know, we talk about WUI, you know, the contractors and the home builders, you know, they're saying, let's build these homes on these slopes where there's dry conditions, strong winds. You know what? And we'll let somebody else figure out that problem, the insurance industry or the fire service. And we see that a lot. And, you know, I think, you know, you would think that after a while, some of these can kind of serve as wake-up calls. Again, as long as we're willing to go out there and respond to those 37 million calls, it's, you know, it is a challenge, which does go back to the funding. You know, local budgets, they're tapped out in many communities, you know, whether it's, you know, communities served by careers or volunteers and even the states. And so, as you said, the federal government, you know, is somewhat of a safety net, but it's there to address some of the baseline needs that otherwise could not be addressed were it not for some federal help there.
Bill, there is going to be a reckoning very soon in Los Angeles as a result of the fires. And what's going to happen is that they're going to want to rebuild, and the insurance companies are not going to want to insure those houses because of the threat that they just paid off on. So now, Tom and Mary Smith, who want to buy a house, go to the bank to borrow money, and the bank says, well, do you have it insured? No. Well, we're not going to lend you any money on a house that's not insured. And, you know, so where are Tom and Mary going to get the $600,000 is going, well, 14 million in California because of the housing prices? Where are they going to get the money to do that? Who's going to cover it? So with you know, local assistance by the federal government in terms of fire protection, that's where they can say, look, insurance companies are going to come back and say, look, you've got good fire protection. We looked at it, we measured it. We're going to take a little bit of a risk here. But that's the thing that's going to happen. If the federal government stops just dribbling a little bit of help into the local economy, into the local fire department.
What do you think the greatest challenge is facing the fire service right now?
Well, you know, the challenge is always going to be the competition for budget dollars at the local level. You know, I had those fights when I was a fire chief. You know, school systems are typically about 50% of a municipal budget. Mm-hmm. Police departments usually 10%. Fire departments like 4%, 5%. And the challenge is the two big challenges that they're going to be facing right now. One is that it's a very short-term career, 20 or 25 years. So the turnover in the senior ranks is continuously rapid, and trying to keep those senior officers educated and trained is always a challenge for the local government. That's why the National Fire Academy is important, because firefighters don't come to the National Fire Academy. It's usually the high-end officers or the high-end technical specialists in EMS and hazmat and fire investigation. The second challenge is that, like almost all fraternal and social and civic organizations, the volunteer fire service is losing people, they're hemorrhaging people. And the local governments typically cannot afford to pay, the smaller communities that have volunteer departments cannot afford the cost of paying for a career department. So there's going to be some community challenges there as well.
Okay. What would you say is your crowning achievement? What are you the most proud of after having served in Emmitsburg for so many years?
Bill, I have to say that my greatest achievement has been encouraging men and women to be successful. And that was the opportunity. That's why I loved being the superintendent, because I'd see somebody and I'd pull them aside and say, what are you doing about school? And, just you see something in them. They've got a special skill set. And I've had the pleasure now of watching these men and women achieve remarkable success. Academically, there's so many more people with earned doctorates now in the fire service. There's research now going on in the fire service. There are fire chiefs who have master's degrees and doctoral degrees who are managing the organizations. And that is just the thrill of a lifetime for me to be able to see that.
So you've seen a lot of those people, PhDs, masters. Sometimes there's those innate qualities, So when you're looking at attributes, when you're trying to define, who a leader is in the fire service, what attributes do you think stand out?
A couple. One is the communication ability. The second is a sensible level of humility, that they know that they don't have all the answers and that they're willing to go for help and ask the people in their organization. And the third thing that I always look at is, are they contributing back to the organization? Are they growing leaders? I guess maybe that's a better way to put it. Are they taking men and women and encouraging them to get the training, to get the education, to get the experience, to replace them when it's time to go? And I'm seeing more and more and more of that, where it's really a gift to their local fire department that they're creating these talented people coming up in the organization.
We're both, I think, we are both military history buffs. I think you more so Civil War, me kind of World War II, in particular D-Day. Eisenhower to me is probably my favorite president, my favorite leader. And there are a couple of things that stick out, that happened on June 5th. When he issued the command, he had his generals at the table, and instead of making a decision on his own, he worked his way around the table, and asked Montgomery, asked Bradley, what do you think? What do you think? And they said, thumbs up, go for it. And so he made that decision to do it. But most importantly, and I know you know this, he had two messages he was prepared to read to the nation and to the world the following day. The first one he did read. We launched a successful invasion. Our troops have made it ashore, etc. And pray for them. But the second message he never did read. And that was basically, we gave it our best. The troops were well trained. They made sacrifices. If there's any responsibility for this decision, it's mine alone. And I think that really stands out, in terms of what makes a good leader. Somebody who is willing to, accept all the accolades, but more importantly, somebody who's willing to accept responsibility for the decisions he or she has made. And I'm sure, again, you have seen that throughout your career, and I know you've performed that way as well during your career.
I'm just going to disagree with you on one point. I'm more of a World War II buff than I am a Civil War buff.
Oh, okay.
Even though I live in Gettysburg, PA, I get painted with that broad brush, and I don't like it at all. My dad landed on day 5 on Normandy. So that ability to take responsibility for when things go wrong is a critical leadership skill that very, very few people, I don't know if they know about it, they should. And the accolades should always go to the troops that are performing it. And as I said, I do a lot of leadership training, and that's one of the topics that I talk about a lot. That if you're a leader and you start to point blame at other people, you're no longer the leader. What happens is the minute the leader stands up and says, it's my fault, it's my responsibility, all of that pointing and finger pointing goes away, and now we can work on solving the problem. Until that occurs, this finger point, yeah, was so-and-so's fault, or, they zigged when they should have zagged, or whatever it is. So if you're a leader, it's the easiest thing to do, and no one has anything else to say. Once you say it's my fault. So anybody that's been at the National Fire Academy and I visited every class while I was there, I'd go into a class and, anybody having I'd ask about different things and, getting them talking. And then I'd say, is anybody having any problems? And somebody inevitably would raise their hand and say, once in a while, once a year, twice a year. When I checked into my room, the dorm room was dirty. I asked them to write down their dorm room number. I said, this afternoon, when you come back from lunch, you're going to be able to do surgery in your room. This is my fault. It's my watch. I'm going to fix this. I'm sorry it happened. Everybody in the class knows that the superintendent doesn't clean the dorm rooms, but I took responsibility for it. And it's an amazing thing to watch. And I highly recommend it.
So will you take responsibility for the food that's served up there? There was a year there where they had some pretty good food, and I think right around the time you were superintendent, it went downhill rather quickly.
Well, it's funny. If you look at, there's several things that are all personal preferences, and of course, food is one of them. And somebody complained about the broccoli or whatever it was, and I say, look, I said, when you were home, your mother served you food you didn't like, and she made you eat it. Now, we don't make you eat it. If you don't like it, eat something else. But keep one thing in mind, your mother loved you and she still made you eat it.
Thank God for the carriage house. So, what got you interested? I would assume the Vietnam War, you might have gotten a letter from Uncle Sam saying, here's your draft number. But, the fire service itself, you got out of the military. What made you decide that this would be the career path for you?
I didn't actually. What happened was my dad was on the fire department and he came home with the application. Okay. And I was 20 years old. Okay. Yeah, Dad. Yeah. Did you fill it out? Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'll get it, Dad. He filled it out. He said, here, sign this. I signed it. And he sent it in, and I went on the fire department. Now, I was afraid at that time, I wouldn't go up a step stool. I was afraid of heights. And I wound up in a ladder company. I spent 15 years in ladder companies as a firefighter, a lieutenant, and a captain. And thank God for the GI Bill. And a little plug for another government benefit. I was able to go to school. And that's really where I learned that you have to get outside your organization if you're going to learn, if you're going to improve. So I got outside the organization and went to school. A number of my college professors were New York City Police and New York City Fire chief officers. And, I learned from them. And that getting out of your little bailiwick, that getting out of your organization is what helps the organization and the people improve.
Okay. As we're having this discussion, I just hope the people who are listening are listening to the message, because what you're talking about covers a broad range of topics. It talks about leadership, but it does talk about the federal government role. It talks about the benefits of federal programs, and again, how the contributions at the federal level are minuscule to what's being spent, by local jurisdictions, but it's still having such a positive impact. So as we, wind down this podcast, I'd just like to just kind of, again, just kind of reemphasize, the value of the National Fire Academy, not only to the students and to the fire departments, but to the citizens across the country, who rely on our firefighters. Anytime those 37 million 911 calls are made annually.
The value of getting out of your organization and going other places to learn should not be overlooked. And the role of the federal service in all of that, you just think about the government program that I referred to before, the GI Bill, that started right after World War II. And it took an entire group of young men who had no opportunity for an education because they were raised during the Depression, and educated them after their military service into the middle class, to good jobs and to skilled jobs. And the reason that we have a strong economy today is because of a small program called the GI Bill. And this that we're talking about for the Fire and Emergency Services is the GI Bill kind of event for the Fire and Emergency Services. Just a little bit of help. But there's one piece that is missing in this conversation, and that is the men and women watching this have one congressperson and two senators from their state that work for them, that work for you, that are looking for their vote. They're looking for you to vote for them. And you need to reach out to them and tell them how important these programs are to the Fire and Emergency Services. Now, I know that there's a number of people who don't think that that's going to be effective. Folks, I fought fires in neighborhoods that you wouldn't drive through at 60 miles an hour with your doors locked and your windows shut. And I've also been at meetings in the White House, and I've testified before Congress. I've seen politics work. Get involved, make phone calls, write letters, and make sure that the men and women you sent to Washington understand the importance of these programs to you.
And kind of continuing on with what you're saying, CFSI on our website, we do have a section on our website that talks about the Fire Academy closure, talks about AFG. We've got links to congressional offices. We have talking points on these issues. Sample letters. And so, yeah, the squeaky wheel certainly does get the grease in this town. And as you being an Irishman, you would appreciate what good old Tip Onieal said, and that's all politics is local. And so, yeah, the fire service does have an important role. When we got AFG started and SAFER started, nobody thought that that was possible, but we unleashed the fire service. And as a result, here we are 20 some years later, and these programs are still being authorized and still funded. So again, please look us up at cfsi.org, and you can find out some more information, or send us an email address at update@cfsi.org. Also, if you go on our Facebook page, I alluded to Chief Donnelly's speech at the Fire and Emergency Services dinner. It's a great speech. During that speech, he talks about the incident command structure. He talks about bringing disparate agencies together, personnel, 2,300 personnel. And that just doesn't happen on its own. That just doesn't happen overnight, as you said, Dennis. It takes hours and hours of training in the classroom. It takes, hours and hours of training in the field. And again, a lot of it does start at Emmitsburg, and we should do what we can, certainly to help the men and women who are out there risking their lives daily to protect our communities. So having said that, Dennis, here we are 30 some years later, still going at it. And I know you're going to be at FDIC. You got a class going on there?
I do. I'll be talking about some of the principles and leadership that we talked about. I'll be speaking, I think, on Thursday afternoon at 3:30. I'd invite everybody to come. We'll have a good time, some nice conversations. And all of the talk is about what you do as a leader. It's not about theory. It's about practice. It's about how to do things.
Yeah, I did go on StubHub, and I see the tickets for your session are going for about $1,000. And so kidding, but anyway, yeah. And CFSI will also be out at the FDIC. We will be at booth 11026. So if you have an opportunity, come on, stop by, and so we can talk about the type of issues that we're working on together with all the other national organizations. So on behalf of CFSI, again, Dennis, thank you very much for participating in this. Thank you for our listening audience, and together let's work the issues in Washington. Let's work the issues at the state level and at the local level. Let's work them together because we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, and if we work together, we can solve these challenges.